Enjoy Scuff Chat. It's always beautiful. So today I'll be reading Christmas stories. I want to first start off with A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and I hope you do enjoy yourself, honey, because enjoyment is what we need most in life. Also, I put on this body oil that smells of water lily. 100% would recommend. Now, Stave 1. I have endured this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. And let me just click that toggle. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay with it. Their faithful friend and servant, D.C. December, 1843. Stave 1. Mary's ghost, or Marley's ghost. Marley was dead. To begin with, there was no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and a chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge that there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as dead as piece of ironmongery in a trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simul, or whatever word, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor and his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee. We'll just go with legate. His sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point where I started. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. If there were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable in taking a stroll at night in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark on a breezy spot. Say St. Paul's courtyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never pointed out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called it Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. I might turn that noise down, but thank you, Clipsy. And thanks for a shout-out, Shmoo. Oh, Meowrick. Don't mind me as I just lower that down a bit. 5 months, Nico. My. Anyway, thank you for coming in, Meowrick, and thank you very much for the raid, Clipsy. I didn't know the proverb would go on for so long. Oh, And Nico, I can do the foot emote with the bikini on. If you want me to, just say so now in chat.
Hello, hello.
And let me just turn this back up so you can really hear it. And for those who just joined in, thank you. I am currently...
Nice.
Oh, thank you for his follow, Slim. And I'm currently reading A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, which I might actually have to go and edit into the scene because I just realized that I don't have it there. And excuse the scuff of my model. Christmas Carol. And let me go and hide it and save. More feed emotes, okay. I'll work on it probably on stream, not today, and if I do, I probably won't be speaking much about playing some nice ambient ASMR for all you viewers to enjoy. Okay, but thank you very much for the sub, Nico. It really does mean a lot. And thank you for the raid, Clipsy. I very much enjoy it. Now, back to my wonderful Christmas Carol. Let me just itch my eye there. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. Yoi Kilmalal, their toe demon. Well, it's always the feet, you know. Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint. Cat, can you quit making... or can you just quit scratching random things, please? Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel ever struck out generous fire, secret or self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. Okay, you have a good night, Clipsy, and may you have a beautiful sleep. And Shimumu, I understand that you have to get sleep real early, so may you rest well, and just know, I smell wonderful right now. Okay. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped at his pointed nose, shriveled his cheeks, and stiffened his gait, and made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly with his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about him. He iced his coffee in the dog days, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat. Hi, welcome in, Akon. Please enjoy yourself. External heat and cold had influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather could chill him. No wind that blew was bitter than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less open to entry. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Also, I finally got stream or sound alerts to work, so feel free to do some, but I think I'm gonna have to quiet them down. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you?" Or, "When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way. I have Newt. I forgot I had Newt. Also, if it worked, please tell me, because I never know when it breaks. No man or woman ever once in all of his life inquired the way to such and such a place. It didn't work this time? The radon. This is tragic. This is just tragic. I'll have to fix it again. Only to have it occasionally break. And all of his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, they would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? The only thing he liked to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep distance, was that the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, all of the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, even old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, bittering weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts, and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been all light all day, and the candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without it that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. You can try the other one's egg, and I'll refund you afterwards. To see the dingy... The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who was in a dismal little cell beyond. A sort of tank was copying letters. Cutie. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so much smaller that it looked like one coal, but he couldn't replenish it. Ah, Vitor, thank you so much for the resub. Now, did the sound for that work? I hope it did. I just hope it did. I don't know if it did, but... Oh, no problem, Vitor, honey. If it was late, it was late. And if you're late, that's okay. You can always come back. And hi, Miss Piggy. Thank you for coming in, hon. Vitor, when you resubbed, did it get off Will Noise? I don't know if it didn't. If it didn't, that's rather worrying. I might have to reinsert my link. Also, you're cute, by the way. Let me just find where I was reading. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore that one worked. Is it just some sounds are broke? Oh, Twitch. Oh, thank you, hon. They are very much rare indeed, but I really need to do a lot more. I feel so inclined to do so. Let me go find it again. Wherefore the clerk put it on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that was the first intimidation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" Ooh, that's a line I've heard a lot. He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew Scrooge's, that he was all glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, His breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I'm sure." "Really? You live there? Amazing, I didn't know that. I can say, where it is, Piggy, but I'll let you say it if you want to." "Oh, and you're working night shift, Nico. Well, try not to overexhaust yourself or burn yourself. I don't quite remember what you do right now, but again, don't overwork yourself there, hon." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right do you have to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gayly. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." "Oh, it is Germany. Vitor. I can tell you where." "Oh, I can tell you where it is, but it's in Piggy's right to say where it is. And if you recognize it, please don't say where it is." Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said, "Bah," again, and followed up with "humbug." "Don't be cross, uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be," returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! What Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer, a time for balancing your books and having every item in 'em through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart," he said. "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. Yes. Don't forget it's Frankfurt on Main. Oh, and welcome in, Maurice. Welcome in, Maury. Please do enjoy. Yes, it's Weihnachtsmarket. And I really want to go to one, but I just haven't been to one. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas on your own way, and let me keep it in mine. Repeat it. Keep it," repeated Scrooge's nephew, "but you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone." "Oh, good, Maurice. It's good that you miss me so much." "Let me leave it alone, then," said Scrooge. "Much good may it do to you, much good it has ever done to you. There are many things from which I have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say," returned the nephew. "Christmas among the rest, but I am sure I always have thought of Christmas time when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it could be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I knew of in the long calendar of the year, when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, not another race of creatures bound on other journeys, and therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it." The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. "Let me hear another sound from you, Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir," he added, turning to his nephew. "I wonder why you don't go into Parliament." "Don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression, and said that he would see him in that extremity first. "But why?" cried Scrooge's nephew. "Why? Why did you get married? Said Scrooge. Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if it were the only one thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Nay, uncle, you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I'm sorry with all my heart. I find you so resolute. We never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I've made the trial to homage to Christmas, and I keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. And a Happy New Year. And good afternoon, said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word. Notwithstanding, he stopped on the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season to the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. There's another fellow, muttered Scrooge, who overheard them. Oh, we got burp. I'm going to mute for just a second. There's a burp. Oh, let me quickly read chat. Oh, more Scala. Welcome in, Scala. It's very nice to see you. Oh, you want to go to a Christmas paradise? I never heard of one before. Oh, you work in a rubber compounding plant. Ah. Do you, work in vulcanization, or do you, mix it? I don't quite know. Now, back to reading A Christmas Carol. Burp. I could chug some water to make me burp, but that's alright. Now let me just sip some tea. By the way, the redeem for that should work too. Oh, that burp wasn't good. There's another fellow, muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. Ah, mixing vulcanization some chemical wane here and there. Ah, interesting. Oh, and yes, Scalabella is cutie. Ah, who overheard him? My clerk with 15 shillings a week, and a wife and a family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam. A Bedlam being a lunatic asylum. This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe, said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. I have the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley. Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years, replied Scrooge. He died 7 years ago, this very night. We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word, liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head, and handed the credentials back. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir. Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Oh my God. Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. And the union workhouses, demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? They are, still, returned the gentleman. I wish I could say they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor, then, said Scrooge. Both very busy, sir. The treadmill, for anyone curious, was a big giant leather, or no, I think it was a fabric of some form, treadmill that you would walk on for hours a day to get pennies. And they thought that was work back in the Victorian times. Because some old weird thing they had about how the mind goes without work for extended periods, it begins to degenerate. Both very busy, sir. Oh, I was afraid, from what you said at first, that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I'm very glad to hear it. Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or of body in a multitude, returned the gentleman. A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink, and means of warmth. We chose this because it is a time, of all others, when want is keenly felt, and abundance rejoices. What shall I put down for? Nothing, replied Scrooge. You wish to be anonymous? Let me just scroll down there. I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I've mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it. My God. And decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know what that. But you might know it, observed the gentleman. It's not my business, replied Scrooge. It's enough for a man to understand his own business, and to not interfere with others. Oh, hi and welcome in, Confusion. I do hope you find yourself being cute as always. I do find that the image you sent me of your Christmas costume was very cute. But also, welcome in. I'm reading The Christmas Carol right now. I got some phlegm in my throat. It's not my business. Scrooge returned. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with others. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge returned to his labors with an improved opinion of himself, and in a more facetious temper than was usual with him. Meanwhile, the fog of darkness thickened so that people ran about with flaring lamps, offering their services to go before horses and carriages and conduct them on their way. The ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping steadily down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds, with tremendous vibrations afterwards, as if the teeth were chattering. Everyone caught the flu? Oh my, honey. Oh, take care of yourself. Do take care of yourself. And also, if you have Maurice in your DMs, feel free to send us sussy wussy. Let me go. out of a Gothic window in the wall, which became invisible and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds, with tremendous vibrations afterwards, as if the teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. The cold became intense. In the main street at the corner of the court, some laborers— oh yes, Maurice, you know what I mean by the sussy-wussy. In the main street at the corner of the court, some laborers were repairing the gas pipes, and had lighted a great fire in a brazier, round which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and wrinkling their eyes before the blaze in rapture. Maurice, you have never been sussy in your life? Press F'd it out, or press X'd it out. The water plug being left in solitude, its overflowing sullenly congealed, and turned into a misanthropic ice. The brightness of the shops, where holly sprigs and berries crackled in the lamp heat of the windows, made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Portiers and grociers, trades became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant, with which it was next to impossible to believe that such dull principles as bargain and sale had anything to do. The Lord Mayor, in the stronghold of the mighty mansion house, gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as a Lord Mayor's household should, and even the little tailor, whom he had fined 5 shillings the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty on the streets, stirred up tomorrow's pudding in his garret, while his lean wife and baby sailed out to buy beef. Oh. You're a gentleman and know nothing, Harris? I completely doubt that. And what's that Patrick about? Ooh, nippy. Oh, sure. I definitely believe you too. Foggier yet and colder, piercing, searching, biting cold, if the good Saint Dunstan had but nipped the evil spirit's nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using his familiar weapons, then indeed he would have roared to lusty purpose. The owner of one scant young nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol, but at first sound, God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay. Scrooge seized the ruler with such an energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost. At length the hour of shutting up the courthouse or counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool, and tacitly admitted the fact that the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. You want all day tomorrow, I suppose, said Scrooge, if convenient. Oh, well, come in, Jess. I didn't quite know you'd be here, but thank you very much, darling, for coming in. And please relax as I read some Christmas carols. Or a Christmas carol. If quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, said Scrooge, and it's not fair. If all I was to stop half a crown for it, you'll think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. The clerk smiled faintly. And yet, said Scrooge, you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work. The clerk observed that it was only once a year. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December, said Scrooge, buttoning up his greatcoat to the chin. But I suppose you must have the whole day, be here for the earlier be here all the earlier next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, went down a slide on Cornhill at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honor of it being Christmas Eve, then ran down to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play a blind man's bluff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers, and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms, in a lowering pile of building up a yard, where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying it must have been run there when it was a young house, playing hide and seek with other houses, and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, and the other rooms being let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house, that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in the mournful meditation at the threshold. Oh, yes. And do you like boiled eggs? I greatly enjoy them, and I had, I think, 6 yesterday, because I was just so hungry for eggs for no reason. Now, it is a fact that there is nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except for it is very large. It was also a fact that Scrooge had seen it, night and morning, during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what was called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which was a bold word, the corporation alderman and lively. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner at that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock in the door, saw the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change. Not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not an impenetrable shadow, as the other objects in the court were, but it had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on his ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or by hot air. Also, get ready for burp time. As if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That, if its livid color made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face beyond its control, rather than a part or its own expression. You really enjoyed that, Nico. I'll be sure to remember next time for you, hon. The hair is stirred by hot air, by its breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid color made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than be a part or its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation, to which he had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, and walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he looked cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except for the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Po, po," and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes on its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. The one time I accidentally microwaved a boiled egg and it poked it with a fork, it popped over the place. Yeah, I did that once, and I honestly found it to be interesting, because what if you were to coat it in some sort of chocolate and then pop it, and then you'd, let's say, have a little egg yolk inside of a chocolate egg? I think that'd be an interesting thing. Might be disgusting, but interesting thing nonetheless. Read that part. You may talk vaguely about driving a coach and 6 up a good old flight of stairs, and though a bad young Act of Parliament, but I mean to say you might have got a hearse up that staircase and taken it broadwise, with the splinter bar towards the wall and the door towards the balustrades. Yeah, old French words. And done it easily. There was plenty of wit for that, and room to spare. Which is perhaps the reason why Scrooge thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. Half a dozen gas lamps out of the street would have lighted the entry too well, so that you may suppose it was very dark with Scrooge's dip. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness was cheap in Scrooge like that. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that it was all right, that he had some, or just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, as they had, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel upon his hob. Nobody under the bed. Nobody in the closet. Nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious altitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual. Old fire guards, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand on 3 legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double-locked himself in. Really? Why would Charles Dickens write 2 sentences like that? Which was not his custom. Thus secured against purpose, he took off his cravat, put it on his dressing gown, slippers, and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. Oh, thank you. It was a very low fire indeed. On such a bitter night, he was obligated to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and paved all around with quaint Dutch tiles, and designed to illustrate the scriptures. The There were Cain and Abel's, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air in clouds like featherbeds, Abraham and Balthazar's, apostles putting off to sea in butter boats. Hundreds of figures to attract his thought, and yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like the ancient Pharaoh's rod, and swallowed up the whole, if each smooth tile had been a blank at first, with power to shape some picture on its surface, with a disjointed fragment of his thoughts. There would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in its highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that, as he looked, he saw the bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the onset that scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted for half a minute. "Oh, Maurice, why thank you. I don't quite know why you did that, but I thank you very, very much, darling, for your generosity. It's a rare thing, but I thank you very, very much. And you are a good boy for it. A good, good boy." Oh, you like this a lot. Thank you, darling. Now back to it. But it seemed like an hour. The bells ceased as they began. Together, they were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts had haunted houses were described as dragging chains. "No problem, good boy. Just continue to be yourself, Maurice, and it'll be all good, okay? You're just gonna have to take it. You're gonna have to take all of this praise." The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder, on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up, as though it cried, "I know him! It's Marley's ghost!" and fell again. "Ooh, you want the good boy and good girl? Okay. I'll do that for your bread, hon." Good boy. Just relax and be a very, very good boy. Okay.
Take a sip.
I'll pet your head. Okay. I'm not sure if the newt works, by the way. I'll pet your head, okay? So just take it and rest it against me. And I'll give you nice pets. I'll run my long fingers through your hair. Well, they're only long because my nails are near a centimeter long, but that's alright. And I'll give you a whole bunch of pets. Okay, darling? You just relax. Okay? Now the good girl for all the girls in chat. You're such a good girl, you know. Coming here every time, giving me compliments, paying me company, and I thank you for that, darling. I really do. Okay. Oh, Could someone kindly remind me to add a beard scratches, a bad boy, bad girl, and breath noise? I think I need to do that. I love you too, Brett. Now we're gonna take a sip too. Oh my, how much do I have left in this? Because I have to be done soonish, I like to say. Just because my mother will come home and I like to speak to her when she comes home. His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up, as though it cried, "I know him." Marley's ghost, and fell again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him, and looking through his waistcoat, could see 2 buttons on his coat behind. Beard scratches bad boy, and I just forgot the other one. Thank you, darling. I very much appreciate it, Chris. Oh, and a kiss, too. That's the best I can do for now. Scrooge had often heard that it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. Nor did he believe it even now, though he looked the phantom through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its deaf, cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound around its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before. He was still incredulous, and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice. "No doubt about it. Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you, then?" asked Scrooge, raising his voice. "You're peculiar for a shade." He was going to say "to a shade," but substituted this as more appropriate. Now scroll down a bit. "In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down?" Oh, it's can you sit down?" asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. "I can." "Do it then." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace. Oh, burp time. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe me," observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," Scrooge said, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may have been an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more gravy than a grave about you." "Blossom, darling. Hi, it's been so long. I want to message you, but I'm just too shy. Ask Chris about that." Oh, it's always Christmas is better than Thanksgiving. You just have to admit it. Thanksgiving is mid. I'm gonna say it. Every time there's a Thanksgiving, all I hear about from my father's side of the family is the price of stuff. And I just have no fun memories of Thanksgiving. So if you want, you can invite me over to your house, and we can have a very fun Thanksgiving. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish them. The truth is that he tried to be smart, as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. Yes, I'm shy, Vitor. Oh, thanks for telling me about the Model 1. Well, you know how shy I am. I can barely message you. Then again, I do need to send some people some thigh pics. As a means of distracting from his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. To sit staring at those fixed, glazed eyes in silence for a moment would play Okay, I'll see you in a bit, Chris. Scrooge felt the very deuce around him. There was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with the infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but it was clearly the case. For though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair and skirts and tassels were agitated as by the hot vapor from an oven. You see this toothpick, said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge, for the reason just assigned, and wishing. You do be very, let's say, arousing when talking to me from the very beginning. I mean, Vitor, that is you. So why would I not be? You see this toothpick, said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge, for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though it were only a second, to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself. I do, replied the ghost. You are not looking at it, said Scrooge. But I see it, said the ghost, notwithstanding. Well, returned Scrooge, I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug. At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise. Scrooge held tight on his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon, but how much greater was his horror than the phantom taking off and round the bandage around his head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors. Its upper jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. Mercy, he said, dreadful apparition. Why do you trouble me, man of the worldly mind? Replied the ghost. Do you not believe me, or not? I do, said Scrooge. I must, but why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me? It is required of every man, the ghost returned, that the spirit within him should walk among his fellow man, and travel far and wide, and if that spirit goes not forth in light, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me! And witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turn to happiness. How do you think my voice is arousing, Maurice? My. We might have to do something about that. Again the spectre raised a cry and shook his chain and wrung its shadowy hands. You are fettered, said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me why. I wear this chain I forged in life, replied the ghost. Made it link by link, and yard by yard. I girdled this of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is it pattern strange to you? Scrooge. Oh, really, Vitor? Scrooge trembled more and more. Or would you know, pursued the ghost, the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this. 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a preponderous chain. Scrooge glanced about him on the floor with the expectation of finding himself surrounded by 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. Jacob, he said, imploringly. Old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob. I have none to give, replied the ghost. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men, nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more it is permitted to me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting-house, mark me. In life my spirit would never have roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and the weary journeys lie before me. It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting his eyes or getting off his knees. It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became so thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said. I just read that, didn't I? Ignore that, darling. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob, observed Scrooge in a business-like manner, though of humility and deference. Slow, replied the ghost. 7 years dead, mused Scrooge, and travelling all the time. The whole time, said the ghost, no rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse. Oh, I'm sorry, honey. You're just so distracting with your beauty. On the wings of the wind, replied the ghost. You might have never gone over the great quantity of ground in 7 years, said Scrooge. The ghost, upon hearing this, set another cry and clanked his chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward might have been justified in indicating it for nuisance. O captive bound and double-jointed, cried the phantom, not to know that ages of incessant labor by mortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity, the good of which is all developed, not to know that in many Christian spirit, working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of uselessness. Not to know what space of regret might make amends for one's opportunity misused, yet such was I, oh, such was I. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. Business? Cried this Scrooge. Oh, let me do it in this voice. Business, cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. It held its chain up at arm's length, as if it were the cause of his unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. At this time of the rolling year, the spectre said, I suffer most. Why did I walk through the crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? There were no poor homes in which its light would not have conducted me. Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear that the spectre was going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. Hear me, cried the ghost. Oh, give me a second. Just a second. Okay. Let me, scroll down here. I need to find out where I was reading again, hon. I will, said Scrooge. Oh, no, hear me, cried the ghost. My time is nearly gone. I will, said Scrooge, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. How is it that I will appear before you in a shape that you can see? I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many a day. It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the precipitation from his brow. That is no light part of my penance, pursued the ghost. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of becoming my procuring Ebenezer. You were always a good friend to me, said Scrooge. Thank you. You will be haunted, resumed the ghost, by free spirits. Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as a ghost had done. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned before, Jacob? He demanded in a faltering voice. It is. I think I'd rather not, said Scrooge. Without their visits, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread, except the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take 'em all at once and have it over, Jacob? Hinted Scrooge. Except the second one and the second night of the same hour, the third upon the third night, or the next night when the stroke of the 12th hour had ceased to vibrate. Look at me, you no more, and look at that for your own sake. You remember what has passed between us. When it had said these words, the spectre took upon its wrapper from the table and bound it around its head. As before, Scrooge knew this by the smart sound its teeth made when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again, and found his supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude, with its chain wound over and about its arm. The apparition. Oh, good, you got an egg roll egg. I was at Chinese just a while ago, and I really gotta say, I do quite love cabbage rolls and the other rolls. I don't quite know what's in one of them. I hope it isn't crab, because then I can't say I haven't had a crustacean in a decade. Though, in case nobody knows this, I haven't had fish in a decade. I know, it's a bit odd. The apparition... let me read. The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that the spectre reached it. It was wide opened. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped, not so much in obedience as in surprise, for on the raising of the hand he became sensible of confused noises in the air. Oh, bird time. That was a bit mid. He became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings of inexpressible sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in a mournful dirge, we'll just say dirge, and floated upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity. He looked out. The air was filled with phantoms wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Each one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost, Some few were linked together, none were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one ghost, in a white waistcoat with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle, who cried pitilessly at being unable to assist in a wretched woman with an infant, whom it saw below with a doorstep. The misery with them was all. Clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost the power forever. Whether these creatures had faded into mist, or mist-enshrouded them, he could not tell, but they and their spirits faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double-locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undistributed. No, it's undisturbed. He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable, and being with the emotion he had undergone, with the fatigues of the day, or his glimpses of the invisible world, or of the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. Okay, and thank you very much for coming, darlings. That was a beautiful story. Well, the first part, that is. I believe I still have 4 more to go after this. Oh, you want a good boy. Such a demanding boy. Such a demanding boy you are, Maurice. But I'll give you a good boy anyway. Oh, Nick. Ignore my elbow for a minute there. Thank you, Maurice, for being here. It gives me such a pleasure that you're here. Being such a good boy. Occasionally streaming and having me pop in and just listen to you. You're a good boy. Good boy. Would you like me to pet your ears? Burp in your mouth? I do have a thing for ears, too, which is a bit odd, probably because I like licking them. But if you want, I can give your ears a little massage with some jojoba oil. I bet you'll like that, wouldn't you, darling? I'll give you a little kiss on your forehead before we go. There are mirrors. Be a good boy. Now to you, babe. Heck, it's been a long time since we've known each other. I've seen you in various chats, being a good girl, being kind to everyone you see. You're such a good girl. Not being stinky. I don't really know what to say, but you're such a good being. Every time I see you, you're nice. I just want to say that I love you and enjoy you, and keep being yourself on. There, a little kiss from me before we go. I can do a better one if you need me to, but good. Oh. And a small little kiss for you, Izzy. Now, does anyone have anyone they'd like me to raid before we go? Let me go, Twitch. Now I want that muted. Twitch. Okay. Oh, Opal's online. I think I raided them last time, though. So I don't know if I should raid them twice over. Let me check mine. Though, if I can't find anyone. No, I can't find anyone who's doing ASMR, so Opaline it is. I don't have any problem with that. I enjoy their content. Oh, and if you're hearing an ad, my apologies, son. So, slash Wait. And whoop. Okay, darlings. I wish each and every one of you a good night's rest. And may you have a beautiful, beautiful night. But if it's day for you, have a good night, darlings. Bye-bye. Be well. And I have a craving for Chinese right now. Okay.